This episode is sponsored by Squarespace. Whether you need a domain, website, or online store, make your next move with Squarespace. Some of you will know that I've moved up to North Yorkshire in the last few years, and one of my favourite places to come on a day when the weather's pretty good, just to have a walk around and a coffee, is the little seaside town of Whitby. Now, one of the things that Whitby is really famous for is it's rumoured to have the best fish and chips in the UK, which is quite an important thing over here. And so when a friend came to visit me recently, we decided to test this theory out. We came down and we found a local chippy, and as we went into the restaurant and sat down, I glanced up at the walls and suddenly noticed the most beautiful framed photographs. These photographs were like time capsules of a Whitby in the past, maybe in the 1800s, with tall rigged sailing ships in the harbour, probably used for whaling back then. And the air was hazy with the smoke of 1,000 wood fires, and you had gruff bearded fishermen standing by the harbour side and women in full dresses and shawls who were combing the beachside looking for shellfish. I couldn't believe I'd never heard of this photographer before, nor seen any of his work. And of course, everyone in these parts knew exactly who he was. But for me, it was the first time I was encountering the compelling work of Francis Meadow Sutcliffe. So I did a little bit of digging and I found out that the Sutcliffe Gallery, which housed and curated his work for decades, had just recently closed and the whole collection had been given to the Whitby Museum. And so I reached out to them and asked if they'd give me access so that I could make a video to share his work with you. They kindly agreed to give me access and even introduced me to Mike Shaw, who was the guy who ran the Sutcliffe Gallery for all those years. So he really knew the work. And so I got to sit down with Mike and get him to tell me the story about this amazing photographer and how he produced such beautiful work. So I'll check in with you at the end of this video and let you know some of the things that I picked up from his work and the things that have really challenged me in my own work. But for now, I really want you to take some time and listen to Mike tell you the story about the life and work of Francis Meadow Sutcliffe.
Frank Sutcliffe was from Headingley, near Leeds originally. He was born there when Headingley was quite a rural little village really, as opposed to being almost a suburb of Leeds nowadays. His father was a professional artist, landscape artist who trained at the Royal Academy in London and exhibited there. So Frank was brought up in a very artistic background. And when Frank was 15, while they were still living at Headingley, his father gave him this massive camera with negatives that were so big, really big negatives, and set up a darkroom for him in an old loft, a hay loft where they lived. And he started investigating. Frank was learning from that point on all the intricacies of the wet plate process, and he photographed his neighbours and friends, just to gain some experience. The whole family moved to Whitby in 1870, I think it was. Then the year after, Frank's father died of pneumonia on the cliffs when he was painting. So Frank at that point was thrust to the head of the family as the breadwinner, and he chose photography, which was a new up-and-coming sort of format and media, to make his living as a portrait photographer. I think Frank would have really started on portrait photography because that was considered the way to make your living as a photographer in those days, certainly the only way really, and opened up a studio in a disused jet workshop because the jet industry was on the decline at that point. So he opened up a portrait studio then, and built up his experience during the summer months more than the winter, because winter was very, very quiet as a tourist resort in Victorian times. During the summer months he was working till about 2 o'clock in the morning mounting prints. It was a very specialised thing to be involved with, this photography in those days. So it'd be probably, there'd maybe be 1 or 2 photographers in the town at the most. So all these tourists, one of the things that you'd like to have done maybe was have your photographs taken while you're on holiday. The type of camera that took most of the photographs that he's famous for was a whole plate camera, a mahogany whole plate camera that had to be used on a tripod because of the slow exposures. Initially his work would have been on wet plates, but that didn't last long. The dry plate soon came along where you could go out with your camera, go out in the field, and not have to take a portable darkroom with you. So these dry plates, one I've got here just to show you the size of what he used, that's the sort of size we're looking at. This is 6.5, 8.5 whole plate size it's called. But if you imagine having a dozen of these with you in a wooden box, you'd know about it, and that's just 12 exposures that you'd be able to take, whereas nowadays we're just unlimited totally, aren't we, really, with how many photographs we're able to take. He made a good living from the portrait work, and obviously his passion was the artistic outlet of producing landscape photographs, but they didn't really ever make him any money directly. What they did do, these beautiful photographs he produced that are now at the museum, and hopefully always will be, but these beautiful photographs that he's famous for, as opposed to his portrait work, he exhibited at exhibitions throughout the world, and he won lots of gold medals, silver medals, bronze medals, throughout the world, in Paris and Tokyo, and literally there are at least 60 medals that he won throughout the world, and a few of them in this country, but a lot of them internationally. So this made him a photographer to come to Whitby to have your photograph taken by, because he was like us going to London to be photographed by David Bailey, say, as an instance. So it did have a nice knock-on effect with his necessary commercial aspect of photography. It had a nice synergy, I suppose you'd say, with his desire to produce artistic photographs and not really make any money with those, but earn fame from that beauty that he produced that was very special. Not many photographers had the eye and the technical expertise to produce the work that he had. Frank Sutcliffe was brought up in an artistic background with his father being a painter, and he accompanied his father on many painting trips. And when Frank Sutcliffe moved to Whitby, he realised that the beauty in what he had around him in Whitby, the atmosphere he loved, the mist in the background, and maybe a little bit of sunshine that would really help sometimes, but he loved that differentiation between the foreground and the mist to create that differential, and that it was like a stage set almost to him. So it worked quite well for him, because in the summer months he was so busy he didn't have the luxury of going out taking photographs of what he wanted to take. So in the summer he was busy, head down, taking portraits. But in the winter, when it was all misty and snowy, he loved the snow as well. But yeah, this beautiful transmission of recession sort of he really utilised in a lot of his photography. It was like a trick of the eye. It made the foreground look sharper maybe than it was, because of that difference between the background and the foreground. When he decided to go out and take photographs of the Whitby people, the Fisher people, he managed to capture the essence of the town and of what life was like in those days, without intentionally romanticising it, but he did to a certain extent, but I don't think that was his aim. Generally, the people that he photographed, he did not want looking into the camera, which was quite away from convention in those days, to actually make sure that they weren't really looking into the camera and be doing work as they would be doing, but they had to stay still for quite a while, and for him to manage to capture that, make it more look as though he just captured that instant, whereas it really was a contrived situation that he was clever enough to make into something that he just walked up to that scene and snapped it, but he didn't have that luxury like we do nowadays of taking a candid shot. So he was very clever in that, and it's what made his photography different from most of the photographers, which is why he won all these awards throughout the world, in effect, was that his work was so unusual. It had a special aura about it, I think. He used the wide aperture, creating a nice bokeh sort of blurred background, so that the figures were in sharp focus, and that set them apart from the scene. Again, a little bit theatrical in a way. A lot of the photographs he took, certainly of the male fishermen, they were hard blokes. They wouldn't necessarily want to be told what to do, and to get the composition that he was requiring, Frank Sutcliffe would have actually, in a kind way, asked them to be in certain positions. It would have been very unusual for them to have just been in the right configuration for them to be a pleasing picture for Frank Sutcliffe. So we know that he did arrange his photographs to look natural, and yet he did arrange them. He must have built up a good rapport with these people, these working people, that in a way he was probably from a different sector of the population was Frank Sutcliffe, but he must have been able to sort of relate to them and have a rapport with them, which I think's really helped the way he wanted to work. So a lot of these photographs that he's famous for are taken in and around Whitby, of the boats. He saw, well, not saw, there was, but he also saw it, the beauty in the boats that were in sail, had a sail up, and they had a beautiful line to them, and I think he really did use that. But some of his more beautiful photographs are out in the country, which would have involved a bit more effort to go out with your tripod and your negatives and everything, all the paraphernalia that you had. He did also cover the countryside, and again created lots of beautiful photographs with people in sometimes as well, a combination of them working, farm workers, but sometimes just a landscape. So I think he must have had that affinity with the pastoral sort of side of things. And then of course is one of his other, I suppose, genres that really set him apart from other photographers of his day were photographs of children that again he managed to make look natural, and just sort of as though he'd walked up to that scene and just snapped the photograph. But he managed to really make the photographs come alive, as opposed to being staid, sort of crusty old images. They just have a life to them that isn't easy to get, certainly with the technology at his disposal. The fisher women worked just as hard as the men, if not more so, to be honest. There was no downtime for them at all. They were cleaning out mussels, they were collecting driftwood for firewood, they were collecting what are called flithers, which is a generic term for shellfish off the beach for bait, for the fishing lines. They would bait the lines. They were really, really hard working, and again they were out on the harbour side front, same as the men were, so they featured just as heavily really in his collection of photographs that he took round Whitby. They seemed to be able to find the time to give to Frank Sutcliffe to pose for him, even though they really would be wanting to get on with their work, unless it was an opportunity for them to have a rest, I suppose. But he did have to get them to stay still and potentially take away the spontaneity from that scene. But he managed to put the people at ease so much that they did look relaxed and as if he'd maybe just gone up to that scene and snapped it like we would be able to nowadays with a fast shutter speed. But he wasn't able to do that. He had to get them to stay still for a couple of seconds or whatever, but still not just be able to go up to it and just snap a shutter. These negatives, these glass plates, were expensive to use. So again, especially nowadays with digital, we're just so spoiled by being able to take as many photographs as we want, and it not basically costing us anything. But in that day, in that period, the glass negatives were expensive, and you didn't really, you had to have the experience, which he did, thankfully, have the experience to make it a one-time exposure, and it hopefully be spot on. And he was so good that he managed to do that, I think. His photographs are of an era of people. They're not of a dry street scene, as it were. They have a humanity about them and a personal connection. You can see how the people used to live. What we take for granted nowadays as being photographed. A lot of these people, a camera pointing at them would have been a bit of a scary thing. They wouldn't really know what was going to happen. But everybody alive nowadays has been brought up with photography. But this was a new thing, a new invention, and it was a bit of an uncertain thing that was going to be happening. And Frank Sutcliffe really managed to get people to relax and just chill out and have their photograph taken. And the results are so special, and there's no other photographers much in his period, in his time, that created work that compares with it. He had a way with people and a way with artistry, what looked good and what the right composition was. And it's not one facet that he excelled at. It was a combination of many skills that created the work that will live on forever, hopefully.
The work of Francis Meadow Sutcliffe challenges me in so many ways as a photographer, but I'll just share two with you that hit me personally. And the first is that he had to be so careful and so deliberate when making a frame. The process was slow, it was time consuming, those plates were heavy, you could only carry so many with you, so you really had to think carefully about every shot you took. In our digital age, for better or worse, I don't think we take that kind of care. We're quite flippant with the single shot, and we can be quite careless with the way we move around and take images. But what would it look like if I took the same amount of care that he took over the single image? How would I think about my photography differently? And I don't have to take up wet plate photography to slow me down. I can just build in some discipline in the way that I think about my shots with the camera that I already use today. But maybe the biggest takeaway from me was the fact that it was the work that he didn't get paid for. That's the work that he became famous for, and that's the legacy that he left behind. And it just served to remind me that there's often a big difference between the business of photography and the work we leave behind as a legacy. I think it's often when we make images in our own time, where we have the freedom to follow our intuition towards those more interesting stories and to find that more interesting subject matter, then we often make our best work. When we're not shooting for clients, when we're just shooting for ourselves. And that also means, I think encouragingly, that those of you who are amateur photographers, who don't get paid to pick up a camera, you stand as much of a chance as any of us to make work that really moves people and endures through time. I just want to say a big thank you to the team at the Whitby Museum, and especially to Mike for sitting down with me and sharing this story with us. I'll leave a link to the museum down in the description below, and keep an eye out because soon they're going to be selling prints of Frank Meadow Sutcliffe's work. And I know for one, I'm definitely going to be getting some to hang on my walls. And then lastly, thanks again to Squarespace for sponsoring this video. If you need a new website or a domain, they're a fantastic option. I've used them myself as my website of choice for over a decade now. Apart from being really easy to put a website together from scratch, I've also added on their newsletter functionality, which I found really helpful in the last couple of years. On my contact page, I just added a little block where people can put in their email address if they want to subscribe. They then get sent an email where they have to confirm that email address, so it all feels very professional and above board. And putting together the newsletter itself couldn't be simpler. It's the same as the website, just dragging in image blocks and text blocks and laying everything out so it looks nice and clean, just like my website does. And it's a fantastic way to keep people updated with when new magazines are coming out, when I'm doing talks or running retreats, and just to talk to my audience about things that I'm learning on the side of making these videos. Start your free trial today at squarespace.com and go to squarespace.com/Sean Tucker to get 10% off your first purchase.